Welcome to week 26 here on Technado, the IT podcast brought to you by ITProTV. I'm Don Pizzette. This week we've got news across several different areas, a lot coming out of the Fedora camp for their upcoming version, and we have a very special interview with Dryden from TitanHQ. We're going to talk about Datto Con and a lot of other things in the MSP space. Very exciting stuff. Stay tuned. It's all happening now on Technado. All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to Technado. Mr. Peter Van Rysdom is out for the week, which means I, your host, Don Pizzette, actually get to have fun for a change. We've got Mr. Daniel Lowry here in the studio with me, ready to help and pitch in. Daniel, how are you going to live up to the legacy of Peter Van Rysdom?
I don't know. I will do my best to be a bit aloof, maybe dry and sarcastic as much as humanly possible, so that they don't feel too displaced, our viewers, that is.
You know, it is different, though, because you have a technical background. Obviously, you are well-versed in IT security and other areas. So I always appreciate that extra feedback, except for those instances where I'm wrong. Because with Peter, I can kind of fake it, and it's fine. But with you, you'll call me out.
Like,
so
that was dumb.
All right. Well, we have a great show lined up today because we are going to cover the IT news. That's the fun part of our podcast. I always look forward to that. But we also have an interview that we're going to kick off right here at the beginning of the podcast from TitanHQ. So we've got one of the gentlemen from that company who's going to be talking a little bit about, a lot of different things. But we're going to start out talking about the Datto Con conference that just kind of passed by. So that's all coming up in just a few minutes. But after that, we'll come back, and Daniel and I will run through some of the latest events in the IT technology space. Stay with us. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm Don Pizzette, and we're going to dive right into an interview in this segment. You know, we love to go out to a lot of conferences and see new technology and talk and meet people, but we can't get everywhere. We can only be in one place at a time. So sometimes we let a couple of conferences fall through the tracks. Well, fortunately, one of those conferences came up not too long ago, which was Datto Con. We didn't have a chance to get out there, but some of our friends over at TitanHQ did. So joining us on the podcast today, we have Dryden from TitanHQ. He's going to fill us in on that, and we got a couple other topics that we're going to talk about. You know, a lot of interesting things. I always like to get a different perspective on that. So Dryden, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a million, guys. Delighted.
And before we dive in too far, would you mind introducing yourself to our viewers, maybe just a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so my name is Dryden Geary. I'm the marketing director with TitanHQ, and we're a vendor, a security vendor who over the last 20 years made our key footprint in email security. And over the last 5 years, we've migrated and we've pushed along more into the HTTP and HTTPS side of things. So we have a web content filtering product, which we call Web Titan, which has been extremely popular especially the last 2 years across the Wi-Fi niche, across the MSPs, and directly with customers. And the demand at the moment is actually an allied version of the product. So email security allied with a DNS filter is proven very, very popular. And we also have a product we use, which GDPR has really brought into play, which is an email archiving product quite similar to what Mimecast might offer. So we're a privately owned business of 55 people based out of Galway in the west of Ireland. And we also have an office in Tampa Bay in Florida and in Northport in New York. So yeah, that's us.
Now, what were you guys doing out at Datto Con? Did you guys have a booth there this year, or were you just attending to see what was new?
Yeah, we were sponsors. We've worked closely with Datto Con for the last 3, maybe 4 years at this stage. So we were a sponsor. We'd sponsored a show in the States last year and sponsored a show in London earlier on, and we found that the MSPs, I think, who are interested in selling Datto and partnering with Datto, they kind of hit the sweet spot with us as well. There's a lot of crossover, and more importantly, at this show, we announced that TitanHQ are actually the technology and power behind a lot of the new networking web content filtering that Datto have offered. So it was widely reported afterwards, the new malware and ransomware protection around the DNA box and around some of the networking products. We're in the background there working with these guys to power that and power the technology and security behind it.
So I've noticed with a lot of the conferences over the years that they usually seem to have some kind of general theme. You know, you get on the expo hall floor and you've got a lot of vendors that are pushing for a similar technology. One year it was machine learning and AI. Another year it was the distributed threat feeds. And what was kind of the overall theme this year? Where did you see a lot of focus?
I thought, yeah, there was a couple of things that really jumped out at the show. So they held a show in Austin. The first thing I would say that we found incredible was the amount of Australian MSPs that were at the show. So we talked to a couple of guys. We had to fly 11, 12 hours to get across, and we thought we were great. But the Aussies had traveled for a day and a half. But the MSP world and the MSP community is really, really vibrant in Australia at the moment, and it jumped out. They were everywhere, to the point of Datto held a international meeting at the start, and they made all the Aussies wear Australian Flykeeper away hats, and they walked around with them during the show. But it was incredible. But when I talk to these guys, I think the market is maybe a little bit behind where things were in the States, and fundamentally businesses want to work with MSPs they can trust. So the first thing I took out of it was tons of Australians, great vibrant market. So APAC, a market we've done well in, is definitely a market that people should be looking at. I think in terms of what was Datto's message and Austin McCord and the team, their message, I think the big thing that rang out here was the integration with Autotask now. Okay, that this partnership between the two businesses has really, really taken off, and they're working really hard to integrate and make the best out of both products and both sets of solutions. And I think that's going to be a really exciting play. They've developed some of their technologies even further, and one of the really, really big things we saw is this direct-to-cloud backup that they're talking about. So Datto have no appliance version of their backup coming, and I know when he announced it, there was silence on the floor. So 2,500 people sitting there was like, whoa, this is big. This could be really, really good. So that was a big one. Security, Don, was huge. It's become a massive area. I think there's a lot of vendors hustling and for the play there, but it's I don't want to say it's an easy sell. I think it's an important sell now. I think it's very, very relevant for MSPs, and I think there's some great solutions out there. So that was a big part of it, and I suppose the work we've done with Datto over the last 6 to 9 months, integrating our security engine to the back end of their networking lines and products, and there's more of that to come. I think that's a sign of where things are, but not just that. A lot of the work they're doing with other products in terms of virus blocking, malware, ransomware killing, some of their backup products, what they're doing to protect against ransomware is just it's incredible. You mentioned the dreaded AI there, but they're doing a lot more intelligent and practical things to back up. So yeah, very, very interesting show. And if I was to add something that I found there too, an important thing, I thought the MSP community was extremely upbeat. I thought the feeling in the room, everyone you talked to seemed to be doing quite well. They were happy where they were at. Business was progressing. They were expressing big growth plans. I didn't hear much mumbling and grumbling. And at previous shows over the last few years, that hasn't always been the way.
I've got this theory about that. And a few years ago, if you started talking to most MSPs, they were saying, I don't know what our future is going to look like, that people are moving services into the cloud and it's all being just taken over by these vendors. Why would somebody want to support their own mail server when they can just go to Office 365 or something like that? And so it was a little bit of doom and gloom. But now, a couple of years have gone by, we start to see these high-profile breaches, and people are finding out that when I put my stuff in the cloud, that doesn't just like magically make it secure, and I still have to try and manage it. And if I'm using an on-premises server versus something in Microsoft Azure, it doesn't change the fact that I still can't call Microsoft and get help. And so people are finding that they still need MSPs more than ever, especially with really complex deployments like with the cloud, where, hey, I could deal with it directly, but honestly, if I have an MSP helping me, now I have a human being I can call on the phone who can help me walk through that technology. And I think that's helped to revitalize that industry. I think the MSP market is strong and poised to grow. Do you see the same?
yeah, I think you're absolutely on the money there, Don. You know, a couple of years back with the rush to the cloud, I think the MSPs stood back and said, you know, where do we fit in here? You mentioned Office 365, and we have dealt with actually a couple of very, very big, I don't want to call them box pushers, but old school box pushers across the States. And we've seen them really, some of the bigger, older businesses, we've seen them really look at things and go, wow, you know, what does this cloud mean for us? You know, nobody needs to bring those boxes to those 600 locations anymore. My strength in distribution is no longer a strength, it's actually a cost. What's happening here? And exactly as you've quoted there, the MSPs have been in this beautiful position where I find when I talk to them, they're lean and agile and they can move fast, the vast majority of them. And they've stepped back and they've waited, and what they've actually found is correct. You know, you can't get on the phone to Microsoft, you can't get on the phone to Cisco. Microsoft Office, it doesn't fix everything for you. Okay, we still have, you see the likes of a Mimecast and ourselves, I suppose, AppRiver, these vendors living off the back of the security vulnerabilities of Office 365. We use a great quote. We say, you know, the bigger you are, the bigger target on your back for these hackers. And what Microsoft have found is that they're shooting at them from every angle. So it's made a business actually for people like us. But the MSPs have fantastically turned around and said, okay, things have changed a little bit, but the end customer, okay, so when I walk in and my restaurant chain with 300 employees, yes, everything's in the cloud, but he doesn't want to go out managing all that. He wants me to come and understand these technologies and manage this for him and be the expert and have the good price and have the great support. So even though everything is sitting in the cloud, you still need your service provider. And I was really struck by the upbeat nature of the MSPs. They, you know, some of these guys are growing like crazy. I think the vendors have stepped back and said, this is the way we want to go to market. Okay, we want to mine these MSPs. We want to build relationships and partnerships. I know we're probably a smaller vendor in the bigger space, but we work with 2,500 MSPs, and quite literally, you know, I'd be very surprised if we didn't know each and every one of them, you know, first name, talk to them regularly, have a relationship with them. And what we're hearing back from these guys is, yeah, business is great. The cloud has been fantastic for us. And, you know, you can mark my words. I'm talking to the execs in Datto. They're clued into this. They're working with the MSP community. They are developing product quite literally from what the MSPs are telling them. And that's their huge strength. And they're lean, they're clever, they're able to get this done, and they're listening to the end customers. So it's a great time to be in the MSP space.
Yeah, and you know, as a business owner myself, I can tell you that I've really benefited from using cloud infrastructure. And even like right this moment, I'm not sure if you can hear or not, but there is a massive storm that is rolling up on our building right now. And in the past, this is where you'd start thinking, all right, does my generator have diesel fuel in it? When's the last time we did a test run? Are my UPSs ready to handle the load when the power goes out? But now I think, hey, all of my services are running on servers up in Atlanta or Washington, D.C. or somewhere else. You know, I don't have to worry about that infrastructure cost anymore. But aside from that, it doesn't fundamentally change the way that we manage things. We still have servers. They might not be ours. They might not be sitting here, but they're stored somewhere else. But they still have to be managed the same way. We still have to do updates. We still have trouble tickets. We still have to manage that. And on the client side, really next to nothing has changed on the client side. You still have a ton of workstations, laptops. In fact, it's even gotten more difficult to support because you have iPads and iPhones and Android phones and all of that you've got to support as well. Now, let's throw TitanHQ into the mix here, because you guys offer a series of products that are designed to you know, improve security and do other things that, because you kind of sit in between the customer and the data, the cloud probably didn't affect you guys much, did it? Because it's really just, you know, traffic flowing through your services.
What it probably did for us, Don, is it especially I think the WebTitan, the web filtering product. So that product would be a product that would be quite similar to Cisco OpenDNS, Cisco Umbrella, and what really happened for us with the cloud is it just made deployment so much easier. Okay, so we're working with an MSP and we talk to a restaurant chain with 650, 6,000 who really cares locations, and all of a sudden the conversation we're having with these guys is, you know, a simple DNS redirect on a box in these 600 or 6,000 locations and hey, you're pointing to our cloud, you're up and running, and all of a sudden you've got the power of 700 million daily URL tests by us, 300,000 malicious sites caught, 3 million phishing sites blocked. You've got in 2 minutes. Okay, the minute you do this. So the cloud really, it just changed distribution for us. In the past we used to have a proxy, we used to have an appliance that you could stick on site, but the cloud has changed all that for us. And as I alluded to earlier, for the MSPs have been so clever. They've done, a lot of the big MSPs we work with now, what they've done is they've built their own cloud infrastructure where their via API, which is a key driver of our product set, via API, they're pulling from the different technologies that they need to talk to. So they're working with 10 vendors, but through an API, they're pushing it through their own cloud-based system, and then the customers come and play from there, and that has been a revelation. So, the world has changed. The box carriers are gone now. This is all cloud-based, API-driven, easy peasy, monthly recurring revenue. Come out of contract when you want. We're not going to hassle you, and that's where the world is going now. And bear in mind, Don, I think a very important point we should make is this specific crowd, 2,500 MSPs that are at this fantastic Datto show. Who is the client here? You mentioned the client. The client, a lot of the time here, is an SME, okay? And what does an SME want? They want clarity and simplicity, okay? And they don't want to be worrying about things like this. And this is why they trust an MSP. And in this market, it's absolutely perfect for us.
All right, now let's throw a monkey wrench into that. Everything's running great. The services are kind of carrying along as they normally do. Things are moving along. And then we have something big like GDPR, right? A regulation gets passed, and companies like yourself, where you sit in between clients and their data, you can't help but handle their information. You're actually based out of Ireland, so that puts you right in the EU. So this probably affects you way more than it affects a lot of us. But how does that change the way you do business? Has that been a big hit, or has it mostly just been like Y2K level, where you kind of big to do about nothing, or what has that been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a phenomenal development over here, in that we're amazed at how everybody jumped straight into this and decided, right, we're absolutely going to get stuck into this, and we're terrified of what the EU are saying. If you listen to certain social commentators before GDPR came along, the EU were having a couple of arm wrestles with the Googles and Facebooks of this world over here. And I think in particular, Germany, France, some of the Central European nations that have a lot of the problems with the privacy, the power of these companies. And, a lot of the discussion in the background was, is GDPR a way for them to give themselves a little bit more power? Strangely enough, when I've been in the States at a couple of conferences over the last 2 to 3 months, and I found the American customers and service providers were really, really interested in this, because they think that their legislatives are stepping back. They're looking at this and they're considering, are we going to do something like this in the future? Our experience has been, we worked very hard to get compliant. It gave us a great boost, because actually we have an email archiving product, a very, very good one called Titan, and that helped you become GDPR compliant, because it allowed, if someone came in, so one of the key things of this GDPR was people's right to access their personal data very quickly and efficiently if they wanted to get rid of it. So in simple terms, what does that mean? If I was a hotel owner and somebody contacted me with a data request, within a 48-hour period, I was going to have to show them, here's the data I'm holding on you, and I'm ready to delete it if you want me to do it. Okay, our product allowed you to do that, so that was one side benefit of it. So I was happy to see it coming. But what we've seen is, since GDPR has gone live, there's been no high-profile case, and everyone to a man and a woman had said they're going to pick someone big, maybe one of the big US companies based in Europe, and they're going to go after them on this. But I spent a lot of time in Google headquarters, in LinkedIn headquarters, and in Facebook headquarters in Dublin here, and they had huge teams preparing for this. So Don, we've yet to see a victim. That's what I would say to you. So I'll come back to you in a couple of months, and we'll update you and see if someone's got caught.
Now, I'm curious, just personally, because it seems like you'd be in a bit of a catch-22 with ArcTitan, where you've got this product that's designed where you can maintain a history of all these email, right? So that you've got a reliable catalog of that data, which here in the US, like in the state of Florida, we have what's called the Sunshine Law, that if you work for a government agency, any communication you make is public information. So they have to keep a record of every email sent to or from any government employee in the state of Florida. But then if you have an EU citizen who has the right to be forgotten, and they send a request in that says, hey, I need you to get rid of this email, or any history of me. Meanwhile, we've got another law saying you've got to keep that email. Now we get a conflict. And for software like yours, or a service like yours that's saying we're going to collect all this email, aren't you kind of like punching holes in that when you start deleting out people's content? Or how do you reconcile that? Or is that just left up to the attorneys?
It's a brilliant point. When you look at the discrepancies across the EU and in the different regions, like an example. An example we saw actually was a legal company that worked with us. So to answer just sideways, to answer your question at a top level, our position in this is we're a data processor in this. We don't access the data. So if you become if you're using ArcTitan, the product, to archive emails, that's within your own environment. We're a data processor who process this, but we don't have access to the emails. There's a data guardian within that business, and they have a policy, and they work through it that way. We don't access it. But your point is extremely valid, because what happens in a situation? Let's just say, like we had a situation where a legal company, a legal business was asking for a certain amount of emails to be deleted, and we were like, well, we aren't the data guardian on this. We don't own it. We're just providing a service, and there was some legislative reasons they wanted to do that. What happens in the situation? It's a bank, and they've recorded that somebody has bad credit, which is an important thing for that bank to know. And then if this person contacts the bank and they say, oh, show me all the information you're holding on me, I don't like that. I want that deleted. But the bank's saying, hold on, this is a part of what we do. We hold this data because you're a bad debt, and you can go now to another bank, and et cetera, et cetera. Where does anyone stand on that? And the answer to that, Don, is nobody knows. And the EU really, we have that's where I'm coming back to. We haven't seen an example yet of someone getting caught. I think what happened, what was good is, I think what were the good things about this? I think if a business can demonstrate that they want to live by the ethics of this rule, I think that's going to be good enough for the legal people. Okay, I think if you can demonstrate we're trying our hardest to do this, to use the term, our heart's in the right place here. Here are the 3 or 4 things we've done. We have a data security officer. We're using archiving. We've got very good security built into our email and to our systems. We're using encryption. We have a data officer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have opt-in on our emails and stuff like this. I think if you're showing intent, I don't think there's going to be too many problems. But I still think in the back of my mind, I think you'll see a big case coming in the next 2 or 3 months. I'm fairly sure the EU, that the way they usually work is they like to set an example, they shoot at someone big, and we'll see where it goes. But I'd be more than happy to come back on the show after, Don, and run you through that.
Yeah, we've all kind of got our eyes on it, and it is neat to hear, though, from people who are right there on the ground, that so far it's business as usual, and that's a good thing to hear, and that these laws, maybe I'm a little naive, and I think that they are holding the public interest in mind. Like, they are trying to make the world a better place. Sometimes the implementation just gets a little rough, so we'll see where that goes. Well, let's see. So far, we have talked about Datto Con a bit. We talked about GDPR. We've talked about just MSPs and their futures. We've kind of been all across the board. Before we wrap up the interview, though, I do want to talk a little bit about TitanHQ. So for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with the company, I know we've kind of, in a roundabout way, talked about several of your products throughout the interview, but can you tell everybody a little bit about TitanHQ and the products that you offer?
Yeah, thanks, Don. So I'm a marketing guy. So if I start talking too much, you can cut me off here. But our business, as I mentioned earlier, 55 people. We're web security specialists. But where we've seen particular growth actually over the last couple of years, and why our business is in a very good space at the moment, has been the merging of a couple of products. So we were famous for our Spam Titan product, which was a very good email secure email gateway. Okay, and then we grew that into a shared cloud that people could use, and we also grew it into a product that had a private cloud. So the MSPs that we talk about, they would have our product Spam Titan as a private cloud, and a multi-tenant development where they would have all their customers using this for security. So what did that do? It protected people from phishing, spoofing, malware attacks, ransomware attacks via email, and it was very effective doing it. But we then developed the filter, the DNS filter, and one of the things we've most certainly seen in the last 18 months, and I think we've seen some other vendors come into this market because they want to play here, is that actually DNS filtering, even though it's a 20-year-old technology and you know, it's not rocket science, it's a very, very effective way of stopping ransomware and malware. And to the point of why is it effective? It's effective because you know, it's like your teeth. Prevention is better than cure. Okay, we're stopping things coming into the network at the top level, and you know, I don't mean to keep harping on about them, but the MSPs that we talk to and the MSPs that we meet, they say, look, this is a great layer for me because fundamentally, what does this do? Fundamentally, what does this do? It gives me a layer at the outset that's blocking ransomware and malware. And why is that important? It's not just as a sales pitch for these guys, okay? It's like we talked to a guy last day, and he said he had implemented our DNS filter for 18 months. He said, I didn't get a single call out when CryptoLocker hit. Okay, so what does that actually mean for him in practicality? We're very practical people. What it means is he had no truck rolls to fix this. So the client who rings and goes, oh my God, I've got ransomware here, I'm all sorts of trouble. Get over here fast. How much does it cost to send your 2 great engineers or your top customer support guy or whoever it is, or in a smaller MSP, you get in the car and you drive over there and pay for the hotel and the 10, 20 hours. That's really actually the saving for them. And I think the big DNS players in the market, ourselves, OpenDNS, the technology and the security angle in the background, they've improved so much. So, you know, I threw out a figure at you earlier on where I said, you know, we would daily, at any given time, in just one dangerous category that we mind would be phishing sites. Okay, so sites that there's a very, very good chance you're going to hit a phishing link on. We would have 3 million instances of that. Like, isn't that mind-blowing? And it's a recurring mass that changes all the time. So what our product does as regards to that is we are looking at 700 million people's search traffic at any one time. We're identifying these problem sites, and in real time, we are hot loading these onto the system so that straight away you're protected from them. That has become extremely popular, and in the MSP market, it has become a core pillar of their security stack. For straight up customers, we get some customers coming direct. It's a layer that they want to bring in, and fundamentally they want to protect the network. So we talk a lot about layers. So it's important to have your email security layer. It's important to have your firewall. Okay, people think we compete with firewall guys. No, we don't. Absolutely not. It's a layer. We're a layer that can sit on top of this. You talk about Datto, all the backup stuff they do. That's another part of the layer. And you know, the clever players, the keyed in system admins and network admins and IT guys, they're seeing this and they understand this clearly. So we've had a really strong 18 months down, but particularly with the amalgamation of those two products. And then when you bring in email archiving as well as an add-in, it's been a great 2-year period for the company.
Awesome. Well, that is great to hear. And, you know, I really appreciate you spending the time with us to run through a lot of what you're seeing out there in the field and just your experience as a platform provider like that. It's such a different perspective on a lot of the things that we've been reporting on over the last few months. So I really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, do you have anything else that you want to mention?
No, I just you know, thanks a million for giving us the time. It's great for one of the smaller vendors to come out and have a chat with guys like you, Don, and show you the world from where we sit. As I said, we're working with 2,500 MSPs. I think one of the big things we've also seen is we deploy a lot of our solutions locally, so we allow people to host in their neighborhood, and that has really, you know, you talk about the international markets, the Germans, the Australians, and even in the States, people want to host locally there. That's been a huge part of it, and I think I see a lot of work in the area of APIs, as I mentioned to you earlier. You know, so we would see what we do really as a platform more than anything, and accessing platforms such as ours to power your own cloud is becoming hugely popular. But yes, look, security. We all know it's a hot space. It's important for these MSPs, and there's some great vendors out there. Okay, not just us. There's some fantastic solutions out there, and I think if you get the mix right, you're flying. And fundamentally, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to protect decent businesses from ransomware, from malware, from, you know, the guys I always feel sorry for is, you know, the small graphic design house with 4 guys there. They get hit by a piece of ransomware, and people always think it's the ransom that bothers them. It isn't the ransom. It's the 2 days they're sitting around doing nothing with the client giving out saying, hey, hold on, what's going on here? Why didn't you have this looked after? So fundamentally, that's what we're trying to do here. And you know, I think with all these clever people on the right side of the bridge, we're getting there.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show with us, and we'll have to get you back on the podcast again, you know, as our stories develop and as TitanHQ continues to grow. You guys really do some excellent work. So thanks again for joining us.
No problem. And the only promise I'm looking for, Don, is that the next time we fly you over here to Ireland and we do it from the sunny west coast of Ireland. I'm sitting here in Galway City, 32 degrees, looking out at the Atlantic, and that's the only promise I ask. Let's go from here next time.
Man, I would love to make it out there. You know, we were just over in England a couple of weeks ago. We didn't make it over to Ireland or Scotland. I'd love to see the whole set of islands. So we'll have to put that on the agenda.
Okay, next time. Thank you very much for your time, Don, and all the team in the background. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Dryden, for appearing with us. And for you, the viewers out there, thank you for watching. But don't go anywhere yet, because the Technado will be back. We've got a couple more news articles to talk about, and then our WTF article of the week, which is always fun. So tune back in. We'll be right back after this. All right, welcome back, everybody. That was an excellent interview with Dryden. It's neat to get a different perspective on a lot of the issues we've been talking about, especially GDPR, from somebody who is over there in the EU having to work with us. So that was a lot of fun. But it's the moment we've been waiting for, at least here in the studio, which is time to tackle the IT news. And we've got a wide gamut of things that are articles that were mostly selected by me. So it's a little bit more Linux and hardware heavy, because that's what I like. Yeah, it's a Don's skewed view of the news.
That's right.
But we'll try and keep it fair and balanced one way or another, right, Daniel?
Yeah.
And let's kick things off. I feel like I have so much freedom without Peter here. I should do this more. But you know, I'm a Linux guy. You're a Linux guy. So let's kick this off talking about some Linux news. And there has been a lot. If you follow the website Phoronix, they have done a great job of covering the news pouring out of Fedora this week. The Fedora project, which is the not upstream but downstream, I guess, for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Fedora has rolled out a number of changes. One of the big ones that they announced this week was a new operating system, Fedora Core OS. It's the new upstream to Red Hat's Core OS. So not often that we get to see a new OS, and this is actually following just a month or two after the collapse of their modular OS they were working on. So neat to see them kind of pick this back up. And I know for me, I had been following. Daniel, did you follow Core OS? Or
I didn't follow Core OS. No.
So if you're not familiar with Core OS, it was basically container Linux. It was Linux optimized to be a container server, and Red Hat scooped them up, acquired that organization. And I was curious to see what they were going to do. So it's already a commercial Linux, so they're selling Core OS. That was kind of expected. But now Fedora is creating their own spin of it, which is free and cutting edge, right? Just like with Fedora versus Red Hat Enterprise Linux, all the latest and greatest tools and things are tried in Fedora. And once they're found stable, they then move them into RHEL. Well, that's what we're going to see here with Fedora's Core OS versus Red Hat's Core OS.
So now the everyman gets a chance to containerize their Linux operating system and play with the big boys, right?
Yeah, and you know what I always enjoyed was if I'm in a development environment, if I'm testing, doing research and development, you get access to the new features ahead of time. And so you see how they're going to affect your product so that when they get rolled into the base product, it doesn't blindside you and all of a sudden you're trying to figure out what to do. And some of those changes can be big. I mean, just look at what's coming down the line really at the beginning of next year when they switch from Python 2 being the default to Python 3 being the default. That can really wreck a lot of stuff.
I was going to say, that's going to wreck some days. That's going to wreck some people, because I've actually run into that where I've got both Python 2 and 3 on my system, download stuff, try to run Python scripts, and they don't work because everything's conflicting with each other. So yeah, being able to spin up these things that are yet to come but are coming and be able to get ahead of that instead of behind that 8 ball is a very nice feature.
Yeah, and that one, that's going to require some dev work. In some cases, you got to retool your scripts for Python 3. Well, here, it's kind of the same thing on the core OS side, but because it's containers, it's even more critical, right? Because we expect to be able to blindly deploy on these things. So it's neat to see that. We don't always get to see the birth of a new distro. We do frequently see the death of distros, though. That's no real shortage there.
Usually kind of long and drawn out, and like a gangster's death in a movie. But
all of a sudden, you realize, like, there have been no patches for this distro in 8 months. Either it's the most secure thing in the world, or it's dead.
Yeah, or no one cares about it anymore.
Yeah, that does happen. Speaking of Fedora, though, that's a new distro, Fedora Core OS, but regular old Fedora is seeing an update. Fedora 29 is slated to come out soon, and there have been some really, I think, pretty drastic changes that are coming down the pipe. And they haven't come right out and announced this as one big change list, which I'm pretty surprised about. So it kind of requires a little bit of digging. But one of the big things is that starting with Fedora 29, the user path will prioritize local user binaries. Now, this one caught me by surprise because I'm going to admit this on the air. I thought it already did. I thought that if I put a binary in my home directory, inside of .local/bin, I thought that would supersede other binaries if they were in like /usr/sbin or whatever. Apparently in Fedora it didn't, and in Red Hat it didn't. And I had to do some reading on this because where I was confused is that Debian and Ubuntu, they do function that way already.
Yeah.
So this isn't a earth-shattering change. A lot of admins like me kind of thought it was already that way. But if you're not expecting it, it can be a problem. And it was interesting to see some of the news coming out about it.
Well, and just the fact that even if it's not that way, well, probably a lot of people were setting it that way anyway and just going, oh, yeah, I need to prioritize stuff that I work on so that it actually runs when I need it to run. So it's, again, like you said, not like a complete magnitude shift of craziness going on here, something most people are probably doing a lot of anyway.
Well, so Michael over at Phoronix, he had a really good point that typically if you have a regular non-privileged user account in Linux, you can't write to the /bin or /sbin folder. You can't write to /user/sbin or /user/bin. Those spaces you're just not given access to. But you can write to the bin folder in your own home directory inside of .local/bin or .local/sbin, right? It's in your home directory, right?
Yeah.
So what they were saying was this potentially makes it easier for malicious software to infect a system that, maybe somebody creates a malicious version of ls, right? The directory list command. And via some drive-by, they cause it to get copied into your user's directory like that. You'd have permission to write. You wouldn't need privileged access for it. When you executed ls the next time, that local binary in your home directory would be the one that triggers. And in theory, it could facilitate malware, at least for infecting your session, right? But when you think about how several other distros are already doing it, it doesn't really change that attack vector very much. I don't know.
Plus, like, if the malware is able to get onto your system and execute code anyway, how hard would it be to put export path equals whatever you want it to be?
Well, all right, that's a really good. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, if
throw that on the fire.
Yeah, because the user can override the path variable.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. so then here I am saying, well, Debian already does it, but even if they didn't, like,
doesn't matter.
This attack vector is, yeah.
I do it all the time as I'm trying to exploit boxes where I'm limited, so I just change the path variable to be one folder, so that if somebody used something like they didn't use a fully qualified path for a binary, great. Now I can create a binary that's the exact same name, change the path variable, and it thinks it's that, and it says, run as root.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned run as root. So when it's thrown in the user's home directory or whatever, it is still run under the execution context of that user.
Yeah.
But if it was used in conjunction with some other exploit,
right,
maybe it could elevate its privileges, and then you have a real big one. But with Daniel's suggestion, I guess at the end of the day here, it doesn't really matter. So it is a change in behavior to be aware of. Like maybe that's not something you're expecting. And it highlights where changes like these can be made in Fedora very easily. And then they see how it pans out. Like, oh, let's see how they react to this. And assuming the public at large does okay with it, then the change makes it into Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
Well, we've seen how well the whole idea of changing like init to SysD has worked out. So I'm sure there'll be zero backlash to this at all.
So you mean like just like Systemd, 100% of the people will love it and adopt it overnight?
That's exactly what happened.
I always feel a little guilty when I say like I like Systemd, but many people, out come the pitchforks and the torches,
and they are at your gate.
All right, well, that is not the only change coming to Fedora. A big one, and this one's been a long time coming, so it's just now kicking in, which is Yum, the Yellow Dog Update Manager, which is the package manager for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, is finally being retired in Fedora 29. DNF, the Dandified Yum is what that stood for. I'm not sure exactly where the Yum comes in on that one, but Dandified Yum, it was introduced many versions ago, and it's better than Yum in many, many ways. It does have some dependency issues that it deals with every now and then, but Yum had plenty of those in and of itself. So DNF has been that default package manager. Oh, actually, they call it out here since, well, it was introduced in Fedora 18, and it's been the default since Fedora 22. So here we are in Fedora 29, several years later, and they're finally getting rid of the Yum command. Now, what does that mean to you, the user? Well, if you're running Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it doesn't mean anything. It's going to be, a few years down the road.
It's going to break a lot of scripts.
It's going to break a lot of scripts. And I'm thinking of things like Yumcron, right, where some people have Yum set to automatically run an update. Well, there is a way to do that with auto DNF, so you can kind of make that happen. But the other thing that I'm wondering about is even with DNF, they still haven't changed the name of the config files. Like if you have a repo, it still goes into /etc/yum.repos.d, even though it's not Yum, it's DNF. Well, now that Yum is retiring, it's going to be one of those situations where you have a new tool with old file names and it creates confusion for new users. So hopefully that'll pan out.
We're going to have to definitely harp on the fact that this is Dandified Yum. And then all those Yum things they see are going to make sense to all the new guys that come in and go, what is this Yum business?
Well, I didn't see it in any of the documentation that I read, but I bet they'll do something like a soft link for the Yum command to point to DNF, because the syntax of the commands is practically identical. So if you're doing a DNF update or a Yum update, if they just link the command, that'll stop scripts from breaking, and they might do that for a little while before killing it off, or hell, they might keep that forever. Who knows?
Yeah, that's their favorite plan of attack when they roll out new things that they know people are like, I'm so used to typing Yum, whatever, and now I have to retrain my brain. Well, now you get to still for a while use that crutch and not to be completely frustrated with your system.
Yeah. All right. Last one here that we've got from Phoronix, which if you don't go to the Phoronix website, they really do have great coverage of pretty much everything Linux. But they had a follow-up article on something we talked about last week on the podcast last week. Yeah, Daniel, you weren't here, so I'm not sure if you heard about this or not. But the OpenBSD project, which is really Theodorat. So Theo came out and he said, "Look, Spectre Meltdown, it's a wreck. Intel's patches are a joke. We're just going to disable hyperthreading in OpenBSD." And by disabling hyperthreading, that mitigates Meltdown and Spectre, just gets them out of the picture. We don't have to worry about crazy patches and things coming from Intel or AMD or whoever else. We're just going to kill off hyperthreading. And they made the statement that hyperthreading doesn't really help most workloads anyway, so most people don't really care. Let's just kill it off, and that's that. So that was news last week. Well, if you like us, some of you out there in TV land are probably scratching your head saying, well, wait a minute, I thought hyperthreading was good. I thought it did something and increased performance.
That's what I was always told.
Well, I will say, so I've taught a lot of VMware training over the years. And with VMware, when you were doing any of the automated load balancing and stuff, and it was evaluating performance of the servers, hyperthreading would wreak havoc with that. Because let's say you had a quad core processor, right? You have four cores. And if you had hyperthreading, now it showed up as having 8 cores. But you didn't really have 8 cores. That if you had 2 workloads that could simultaneously exist on the same core without overlapping, then yeah, it was like you had 2 cores. But that didn't always happen. And so a lot of times you had 2 workloads that slightly overlapped, and so you couldn't take advantage of hyperthreading. So while you might show as having 8 CPUs, you were really only able to carry the workload of 5 or 6 CPUs. And so it skewed all the performance numbers. You'd look at hardware and think that it was a 50% utilization when it was really just maxed out with unique workloads that overlapped. And so in the VMware data centers that I've worked in, a lot of the times we would disable hyperthreading so that we got proper performance reporting. And you were giving up performance, but you were doing it so that you got more accurate numbers, which meant a more stable environment and better balancing of workload across the hardware. So that was kind of it.
Depending on what your environment looks like, you may have already been doing this.
Maybe. But now, I will say I did that on VMware, like with vSphere and ESXi. Outside of that, though, like if I was just deploying a bare metal Windows machine or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, I always left hyperthreading on. Yeah, because what the hell? You know? Maybe I will get that extra power.
That's right.
You had made a comment earlier today about like, hey, if I'm paying for that, I want to get the performance.
I'm like, even if it gives me a 1% increase in performance, hey, why not, right?
Yep. And so, but last week the news was really current. And so we just didn't have a way to report on that and say what it was like. Well, over at Phoronix, they specialize in doing a lot of hardware benchmarking. And we used some of their benchmarks back when the Spectre Meltdown exploit patches were released, where they said that they could impact performance up to 40%. But then in benchmarks, we saw the numbers were actually much lower. So what Michael did over at Phoronix is he basically took some hardware and he ran some benchmarks. Now, he wanted to use an operating system that was a little more common. The OpenBSD is not all that common. So he took Ubuntu Linux 18.04, and he disabled hyperthreading in it. And then he went and ran some benchmarks. And what he found was that while the difference was not crazy super significant, there is certainly a difference. And if you look like, here is his Blender benchmark. This is showing where if hyperthreading was enabled, that there was a certain benchmark that he could run that would complete in 1,286 seconds, and that with hyperthreading disabled, it was 1,843 seconds. That's a difference of, almost 600 seconds, like 10 minutes. That's a workload that would have finished 10 minutes earlier with hyperthreading turned on.
By Grapthar's hammer.
Yeah.
What a savings.
What a savings. So that's a big deal, right? And if I tell you, hey, here's this switch, and if you flip it, stuff gets done 10 minutes faster.
Yeah. And then the next thing you do, that's going to get done 10 minutes faster.
People want to flip that switch.
Yeah, they do. They want that switch flipped.
So now we're left with this decision, right? So Daniel, what do? Do you leave it on, turn it off? What do you think?
I'm turning that sucker on all day long.
All right. I think the moral of the story is that you need to understand what goes behind that decision, right? And this is for each and every one of you out there in TV land and us sitting right here, that if I worked for Microsoft in their Azure data center and I was dealing with multiple customers on shared hardware, and I knew that one customer could take advantage of Meltdown or Spectre or whatever to potentially read cached processor information from the other customer's data, I can't have that. And so for them, disabling hyperthreading hurts performance, but it increases security. If security is your concern, you want that. You want to have that protection. And this is a way to guarantee it, right? But if I'm a home user and I'm about to fire up, I don't know, what video game is popular with the kids these days? Fortnite, right?
Yeah.
So
there you go.
And I need to shoot people in the face as fast as I can, right?
Minecraft still a thing.
I guess it probably really comes down to video card more than general processor. But either way, I'm going to want every bit of performance I can get. And if I paid my hard dollars for that CPU, I want the best it can do. And security at that level, like if somebody already compromised my hardware to take advantage of Spectre and Meltdown, it's my system. It's not even shared.
Yeah.
So they already have access to everything on mine.
You're in.
Yeah. So for a home user, I'm keeping hyperthreading on.
Yeah. Even if it didn't, they don't care anyway.
Well, that's true.
They're writing passwords down.
It's taped on the monitor.
That's right.
Yeah, well, the complexity of the attack, it's definitely targeted towards cloud vendors. But it is interesting to see that it's a pretty extreme way to go about it, because you could say, you know what, I'm not going to disable hyperthreading. I'm going to wait for Intel to fix this, or I'm going to wait and hope that even though they've already released several patches, that maybe they've already fixed it, maybe it's done. A lot of times it isn't, so
Yeah.
we'll see. But it does go to show that it's not without its price. And if you look at it, he ran like 15 different
There was a
benchmarks.
lot.
But every one of them was similar. That there was always a difference. Here's the parboil that he ran, which was over 1 second faster with hyperthreading enabled than disabled. And when we're talking 1 second out of a 8.4 second runtime or 10-second runtime, that's a 10-12%
Yeah.
difference. That makes a difference. Oh, that's a stupid thing for me to say, but
It did get your
it's
point
different.
across, Don.
All right, we said we'd report the news. We didn't say we'd be intelligent about it.
No.
So anyhow, interesting to see that, and just across the board, that was what you were getting. I will remind you, if you do sit down and dig through all these benchmarks, they are great, but be aware that some benchmarks, higher numbers are better. Sometimes lower numbers are better. It's like watching golf versus basketball.
Yeah,
you need to understand the scoring
Check the
system.
metrics. He does put a little thing in the top left-hand corner of each one of the benchmarks to tell you.
Oh yeah, like here,
Seconds,
more
seconds,
is
less is
better.
better, more is better. So
Yeah, definitely
pay
something to pay
that.
attention to. All right. Well, I think we have run through a good bit of Linux news, so let's move on
Is
to that.
there anything else?
Well, there were a couple of interesting ones that popped in. Let's see. What are we going to do next here? Microsoft. Microsoft has been making some various announcements. Some things have been happening, and we've been seeing some previews for the next big Windows update that's coming out. And I can't remember if we reported on this or not. I think it was reported on when I was out of town that Microsoft was previewing their tabbed Windows feature. And Daniel, have you ever seen the tabbed Windows feature?
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I saw the little marketing campaign that they had about how neat it was, where you open up one window, and inside of that window, you can create another tab that's to something else inside of the Windows operating system. It did look pretty cool. I can't imagine that I would use it a whole lot, just because I don't use Windows a whole lot, to be honest with you. But a neat idea.
I mean, if you think about it, like the tabbed browsing,
Right.
I couldn't imagine a web browser without tabs anymore.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
Imagine if you had a command prompt that was just tabbed by default.
I do have a tab.
Well, so if you're a
I look at
Linux
Linux.
user or whatever, I'm used to that. But in the Windows world,
Yeah.
you didn't have that. PowerShell,
That's
command
heresy.
prompt. I know. So you could get a third-party product, but
Yeah.
it would be nice if it was built in. Your File Explorer, instead of opening these different windows, how about giving us some tabs instead of the navigation bar on the left side, which is it is useful but cluttered. It would be nice to have all these different things be tabbed. The interesting thing here is they threw out this preview last year. I think it was before the Fall Creators update, and then they yanked the feature right before it came out. And then here in our new preview builds, it came back, and so people are like, "Okay, this is it. It's finally going to come." Well, no. So it's been yanked. If you've been excited about the tabbed window feature, Ars Technica reports on it that feature's gone, and it's not temporarily gone. It's gone for this next release.
They decided to ixnay that sucker.
Well, it might come back in the next preview for the next big update.
I wonder what the up and down with it is being caused from.
It's got to be application compatibility.
Yeah.
Right? Like if an application is not designed to have tabs, and all of a sudden you put tabs
They're
around
trying to
it,
shoehorn that in there, and it's just killing it.
all day long, I've been racking my brain trying to remember. I had a program, I think it was by Stardock or somebody like that, years ago, 10, 12 years ago, that did exactly this. That would let you take any application and stick tabs around it. And some applications played nice, some didn't. Some, like, I would bring up a command prompt, and then if I moved to another tab and came back, it wouldn't accept text input anymore. Like, it just never regained focus. Like, that kind of stuff would happen. I have to imagine that's what it is.
The first thing I thought of was there used to be a web browser called Ghostzilla. And what it did was whatever open window you had these like swipe with your mouse maneuvers. And it would actually open the browser inside of, so if I had Word open.
Oh, I remember
right,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And then if your boss came, you could swipe right really fast and it would bring you back to.
And it had a black and white mode.
Yeah,
Right? And so I remember
was
that.
super
It was
cool.
awesome.
Yeah, it was.
So how much productivity would you say you've wasted?
I was not a productive member of society.
Ghostzilla. I wonder if that still exists.
I don't
Because it
I'll
would
look it up.
it would take over a part of the window of whatever application you were in, so you could stick it in Microsoft Word or Excel or whatever. Yeah, it just looked like you were in a document. You're actually browsing the web. Oh man, that was a long time ago.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
there is still a website. Yeah.
it still exists.
Visicord, Ghostzilla, it is here.
Which
I don't know how long ago it's been.
let me just mention
you
this.
can get fired.
Yeah, because a lot of people thought like, all right, so when somebody walks up to my computer, they can't see what I'm browsing, right? But the IT team, Daniel and I worked at an insurance company together years ago, and do you remember? And I won't go into too much detail, but there was a gentleman who was browsing inappropriate content.
Yes, I do recall this.
And so they gave him a warning, and they said, "Look, you're browsing some naughty stuff, and that's not allowed."
You gave him a hand slap, and
I managed the web filter, so I generated the report that showed a laundry list of sites that were quite bizarre.
What did you do besides this?
Really, like, I don't understand how he got any work done. But so anyhow, a week or two later, they asked me to pull the report again. I pulled a report on this guy, and here it is, a whole laundry list more. And apparently, he thought we were just pulling his chain, like, oh, you can't see what I'm doing, or maybe he was using something like Godzilla. And what he didn't understand was, yeah, we might not be able to see it on your monitor, but
every web request you make,
you cross the network. We control the network, and so
SolarWinds goes, "Hey, look."
Yeah. We used WebSense.
Oh, WebSense.
It was all in the WebSense logs back then. But here, I'm pulling it up on my computer. I found the Ghostzilla page. So here they're showing an email. Wow, this is Outlook Express. This is really dated.
This is super old.
I have to see if this still works. But see how they're in Outlook, and it looks like he's reading an email, but that's actually a web browser embedded right there inside of the preview window. And it goes light gray like this, so you kind of mask it.
It kind of like blends in.
Yeah. Well, that was good stuff right there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyhow, not tech news, but now I certainly have something I want to check out after the show. But if you were looking for that tab feature and hoping it was finally going to come out, your dreams are dashed.
Yeah.
Oh, well. But there you go. I do have to.
You can always download Godzilla.
Got to be compatibility.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to some other stuff. Android Police had an interesting article on some new stuff that Google is doing in the Android space. Google has officially rolled out digitally signed applications in the Google Play App Store. Digitally signed applications are pretty common in macOS, in Windows. I'm kind of surprised that they weren't common already in the Android space, but apparently they weren't.
Don, I smell DRM.
Yeah. Well, so the idea here is that when you download an app from the Google App Store, how do you know it hasn't been modified? How do you know that somebody hasn't messed around with it? Well, they can digitally sign it so that if the package is modified in any way, it fails a DRM check. It won't run, and there you go. You're protected. There are lots of people who take the APKs, right, the application packages that are used in Android, and they open them up because you can open them up. There's APK unpackers out there like crazy, and then you can inject malware into them, repack them, and post them wherever you want. That's one of the reasons why malware on Android is far more prevalent than iOS, because iOS won't let you sideload stuff unless you go through their whole developer hoops and jump through that. With Android, anybody can sideload. You just turn on that, what's that setting called? Not untrusted sources, but unknown sources.
Oh.
It's you go in the developer options on your phone.
Something like that.
You just enable that. And even like when it blocks an app, it even offers to take you right to that screen so you can turn it on. They make it easy for you to disable that. So Google rolled out this feature, and a lot of people said exactly what Daniel said, which is, oh, great, they're starting to package in DRM. Yeah. But so far that hasn't been seen. I mean, they could, but they're still allowing you to sideload.
The fear is that like this is the slippery slope that we fall down, and eventually that's what it'll be. And only stuff from our approved vendors you install. Now we're trying to root stuff.
So I mean, here's the thing. Like if I were to download the Facebook APK,
right,
and crack it open and inject malware into it, right, and then send it out. Well, it was digitally signed, so the digital signature is now broken. So when somebody tries to install it, they'll see that and they won't install it. Save the day, right?
Yep.
But if I'm going to go through the trouble to break open the APK and modify it, I can just strip out the signature.
Yeah.
Right?
So
and then
you don't even get a signature prompt. Yeah.
So now they wouldn't even know. I mean, it's just an unsigned APK at that point, and people have been installing those all along anyway. So I don't see how this is going to do any good without DRM stuck on it. Like, I mean, the digital signature eventually would have to be like some kind of key to decrypt the data inside of the APK. And when the signature's gone, the APK is gone. Like, I imagine it will have to lead to DRM. But as of right now, in its current implementation, it's not.
Yeah.
I just don't know how effective this will be. Have you ever messed with Android APKs?
No. That's
So
Scary stuff.
yeah, and there's a lot of products out there like Lucky Patcher. If you ever get bored, look it up. Don't install it, but look it up. It's 'cause you cannot find it from a trusted site, that's for sure. But it's a software suite that is specifically designed to like disable in-app purchases and disable DRM checks. And
I'm downloading that right now.
So if you're an Android pirate, like this automates the whole way to pirate software. And that is why you see these third-party Android stores that are packed full of free AAA titles, you know, stuff that would be $8, $10, $20 in the Android App Store that's free. And if they're going to go through the trouble to break the DRM, why not stick a little Bitcoin currency miner in the background? Why?
It's a victimless crime, everyone. Come on.
know. You know, they deserve a little Ethereum for the work they're putting in, right? So that's the trade-off, and that's when your mobile device gets compromised, which is probably the worst thing you could have get compromised. Because I mean, think of all the personal information that goes through your phone.
Yeah, it is the biggest. Like that attack vector is the big one. That's if you don't already see that as being the biggest problem in the future, in the near future, the very near future, then you've got blinders on. Because how many mobile devices are out there running an Android operating system? A lot.
Yeah.
Right. So they're primed to be the big attack vector now.
You know, you give somebody access to your phone number, your voicemail, your text messages. Heck, text messages, that'll break up a lot of multi-factor authentication that uses text. Like they could get access to that. More importantly, your specific GPS location data, so they can see where you are, where you've been. If they can compromise other applications, you know, maybe I do a lot of shopping from my phone these days. So now access to that stuff that normally would be limited to my computer, but I'm just as likely to buy stuff on my phone. Because I think about something right now. I'm like, oh, I need to buy that before I forget.
Don, you happen to have a hammer over there? I just need that for a second. No reason.
You know, every now and then, maybe this is a psychological problem, and let me see if you have this too. I get this urge to take like a cell phone or whatever and ram it screen first on the corner of a table. Do you ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Like it's weird. At least I don't know, once a week, twice a week.
Weird if everybody's having it.
Yeah, no. It's like I just want to see the crush it right on the corner. But anyhow,
we should buy like an old Nokia. And
I've got.
You've probably got one laying around.
We'll do that on the show next week.
Smash that sucker.
Have a whole series.
Slake that lust, right?
Don and Daniel destroy technology, one device at a time.
Will it blend?
All right. Speaking of destroying technology, we learned this week that all of our access points are going to go in the trash because the Wi-Fi Alliance certified WPA3, the newest level of wireless encryption.
That's right. WPA2, old and busted. WPA3, new hotness.
Yep. And, you know, we've talked about WPA3 a bit because it was actually it was approved way back in, I think it was in November or whatever, but now it's the Wi-Fi Alliance who actually certifies equipment for it. So now we'll actually start to see equipment with WPA3. And Daniel, you deal with the security world. Do you know the specifics on what happened to WPA2?
So they were able with quantum computing to break the encryption cipher.
Quantum computers.
If I'm not mistaken, that's what happened. Plus, people still tend to use like really weak keys for the personal stuff. So like you can crack that pretty easily. Yeah. So that's a problem.
So quantum computers, Scott Bakula tried to warn us. Nobody listened.
Do that.
And so anyhow.
nice Quantum Leap reference there.
It was terrible in Star Trek Enterprise, but Quantum Leap was good.
Oh, it was a great show.
So anyhow, WPA3, it is more secure, which is exciting. It is going to be the way of the future. We certainly want to go to it. But if you're asking yourself, if you're holding out hope and saying, ooh, I wonder if they'll push that as a software update to my hardware. Daniel, do you remember when WPA2 came out?
I don't actually.
So I remember going through that, and it was not a software update. It was buy new hardware. And,
it was buy new
and it's not just your access points, because it's got to be supported on both sides. Your operating system has to support it, your wireless card has to support it, and your router. And back then, I remember I had this PCMCIA card in my laptop, so I took it out, dropped it in the trash, bought a new one, popped it in, and now I had WPA2. Well, what about my laptop now?
Right. I'm not dropping that in the trash.
Wi-Fi is integrated in the motherboard, right? The antennas are run through the monitor, and you can't just swap those out. I'm not going to go buy a new laptop for WPA3, and that means we're likely looking at a slow rollout on this, unless they do just magically somehow come out with some software update to do it. And to replace routers. Like I just got new routers at home, or a new router and Wi-Fi mesh stuff. I had to replace my Wi-Fi mesh. The thing's not even a month old.
Jeez.
So WPA3 is going to be a bit down the road. The WPA2 exploit, it's one of those theoretical exploits where it's proven that it can be done. So we're not in super danger. But the thing I always recommend to people, and the thing that I do myself, is I never count on wireless encryption. Because wireless encryption can never be as good as what you do with IPsec or VPN tunnels, right? When I go to a hotel and I jump on their wireless, I don't care if it's open or WPA2 or WEP. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to trust any of it. I'm going to build up a tunnel. I'm going to do, something to make sure that I know what the security level is set, that I know the key. I'm the one who created that. VPNs give you that functionality. So if you're panicking over this, don't. Just know that WPA2 is not great, and you need to supplement it with something else.
Yeah, and when WPA3 becomes like more of a thing, it's be time to transfer over to that anyway, and to just be prepared. That's what I've never understood that about new technology comes out, right? It's something that's going to increase security or functionality or whatever, and there's just people that hold on to that old and junky technology. No, I say it's junky. It's just old, right? It's not as good as the new stuff. If you see that coming down the road, there it is. It's in black and white in front of you. Be prepared. You're going to want to spend some money when it comes time to do that, so that you can be on the right side of security, and just be ready for it. That's always what you can do.
Now, there is one quote from this article that really stood out for me, and this article is coming straight from the Wi-Fi Alliance, so this is their official press release. They put in here where they were talking about WPA3 Personal and how it was introducing levels of security, and WPA3 Enterprise. And the sentence that I just want to highlight right here is where it says, WPA3 Enterprise offers the equivalent of 192-bit cryptographic strength. All right. Now, that word equivalent has piqued my interest enough that I want to go and read the actual standard for WPA3, because in my experience, whenever somebody says the equivalent, it's BS, right? Like, and Daniel, you probably remember this, triple DES.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So regular old DES was what? It was like 40-bit encryption,
yeah, it was
right?
super low, yeah.
And the idea behind triple DES was that you encrypt something with DES, and then you encrypt it again with DES, and then you encrypt it a third time with DES, right? And by the time it's done, what do you have? Is it 120-bit? Is it,
Just
40
takes you
times
longer
3?
to crack it, yeah.
Well, but they found where there was some kind of flaw in the algorithm where it wasn't even 3 times the level of security. It ended up being like 2.2 times the level of security because of this flaw. And so it wasn't as good as people thought it was. So when they say it's the equivalent of 192-bit cryptographic strength, I want to find out what that means. And
you'll be glad to know that a lot of banking institutions still use triple DES for their ATM.
See, and triple DES is not
PCI
considered
compliance.
safe. I mean, even SHA-1 is not considered safe. SHA-256 is really what you should be using today or higher. But yeah,
no,
you just
payment card industry is hanging on to, and I know they're trying to do something to increase the strength behind that, but still triple DES.
Yeah,
rocking on.
Yeah, or you know what I'm saying, SHA, which is hashing. On the encryption side, it would be AES, right?
AES
in the AES 256. Sorry about that.
I'm sure you can get away with 512 or higher. That's the way to rock.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah, and that used to be a problem because your hardware couldn't keep up with it. Right? You'd have to sacrifice throughput for security. But hardware's advanced so much, and Intel CPUs actually have acceleration built into them for AES. So you can really crank through. Yeah, absolutely. But anyhow, moral of the story here, WPA3 is out. It's exciting. You want it, but don't be in a hurry. It'll probably be a couple of years. I remember with WPA2, my holdout device at home, I had 2 things. I had a VoIP phone that didn't have WPA2 support, and the Nintendo Wii. The original Wii only had WPA support, not WPA2. And finally, I just said, screw it. That's it. I've got to get moved over to WPA2, and so we just shut that one off. Because if you ran in mixed mode, that kind of invalidated the whole thing.
You're basically just dropping back to WPA, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so speaking of hardware, this is a fun one. If Peter were here, he would make fun of me and my obsession with the size of SD cards. So there have been some announcements about some advancements in SD card storage. And so this week we found out that SD cards are coming with up to 128 terabyte storage capacity. That is pretty impressive for an SD card. And up to 985 megabytes per second speed, so almost a gigabyte per second with NVMe and PCIe interfaces. That's a big deal. That's a serious SD card right
Don,
there.
I cannot wait to purchase one of these and slide it right into the side of my. Oh, that's right. They took away that on my MacBook.
Wah, wah.
I have the little dongle thingy.
I will say, though, that it wouldn't necessarily matter.
Right.
Because what they're saying here is that it's got to be NVMe or PCIe bus. And when you normally plug into one of those SD card readers, a lot of times they're on a USB 2 bus.
So you're just going to get throttled anyway, right?
Because, and most SD cards can't even operate at the USB 3 speeds. So they do a USB 2 bus to save money on those, and nobody notices because it's all the same.
So I'd probably have to buy some sort of port replicator or whatever anyway, right?
Yeah, or
to
again,
try to get through.
a couple of years go by, maybe new
USB-C.
laptops come out,
Yeah.
and if old Johnny Ive hasn't killed off all our ports by then maybe they work.
Yeah.
Or who knows, maybe there'll be a new technology. You just lick the card and stick it on. But over at Tom's Hardware, they had some great diagrams showing what the speed looks like on this stuff, talking about like high-speed SD Express and going all the way up to PCIe Gen 3, and you see how gigantic a jump that is.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. So this is certainly the future. They call it SD Express, and what these memory cards are going to be like. They have another chart down here. Here we go, where it kind of breaks it down. Now, do bear in mind that 985 megabytes per second, that sounds pretty fast, but if you've got a SSD, especially an NVMe one, those are normally operating at 6 gigabytes, not at 1 gigabyte like this. So these are still not as fast as your traditional SSD. So it's not like I'm going to say, that's it, I'm using SD cards for everything.
Yeah.
We're still going to have a need for SSDs, which are also continuing to get faster and bigger on a regular basis. So anyhow, cool stuff. Good stocking stuffers,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
128 terabyte SSDs.
Yeah.
I mean, SD cards.
Or if my DSLR will take that.
That just like WPA3, your hardware has to support it. You
What you want.
pop it in your phone and it shows up as a 4 gig card.
Yeah.
Have you had? I've had that happen with like 128 gig, and
then you take it and you smash it on the corner of a desk.
see,
You're mad.
This is what drives technology.
That's right.
All right, let's jump over to the folks at Slashdot. They had an interesting security article. So in the security space, couple of interesting things in security news. This one dealt with Swan video surveillance systems, right? I'm sure, what are those called? Not DVRs, home security recorders. What are those called?
I have no idea.
Oh, they got a name, like DVR, but
I would
anyhow,
say
security system.
Surveillance recorders. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Yeah,
maybe
we'll
we
go
need
with
to
that.
make an acronym.
Yeah.
But Swan had a little bit of a problem where a customer of their security cameras started receiving video footage from another customer, right? So notifications of motion and entry and seeing video footage. So basically giving them a window into some complete stranger's house. Now, fortunately or possibly
It wasn't like
unfortunately,
bathroom cam, was it?
it was the one in the
I was
closet.
like, oh
So-
no.
So unfortunately for Swan, or fortunately for the rest of us, the person who was receiving the video happened to work for a news agency.
That's serendipitous.
So this got brought up. It was a BBC employee, and so the news broke here. Basically, what happened, and this is pretty interesting, is that accidentally at Swan headquarters, apparently, they had two cameras that were given the exact same identity. And so when customer one's camera ran out of battery power, they took it off to charge it. Customer two's video footage now started getting sent to them because the two cameras had the same identity. This goes back a long way to technology like MAC addresses, right? Media access control addresses, those layer 2 addresses that are burned into every network adapter. In theory, they're supposed to be globally unique, but it's actually not uncommon to encounter two cards that have been accidentally burned with the same MAC address.
Human error is something you can't patch very easily.
Yeah, and on the computer side, we see this a lot because of virtual machines, where it's really easy to have two VMs with the same MAC address. On the hardware side, it's far less common, but it has happened. I've experienced it twice in my IT career where I've come across two devices that had the same MAC address through unintentional vendor error. And when that happens, traffic sent to one is being delivered to the other. Now, what makes this one more spectacular than that, MAC addresses, that's local traffic, right? Traffic in your network. So at least it's two machines on a network that you control. Here, this is over, the internet. Well, if you have a good ISP, they're blocking and controlling that, right? It shouldn't happen. They should have like layer 3 or MPLS tunnels or whatever that's in there protecting from that. But in this case, it was over the internet, right? Two completely different customers. That the problem was at Swan headquarters. And so anytime you're using a cloud-connected device like this, that device has to have an identity. And if another device has the same identity, now you run into a problem. You could have, and here it's a security camera, which is like worst case scenario.
Yeah.
But I mean, it could be your cloud-enabled scale. And so one day you weigh in at 180 pounds, and the next day you weigh in at 300 pounds. You're like, what the heck? And you know, it's just somebody else's weight came in.
And we were just talking about this on the Ask Me Anything about IoT. Why is IoT such a concern? This is why, things like this, because to the rush to market to get things just to make that money, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's fine. But when you're sacrificing your user experience and security to make that money, that's when the problem comes in. Now, the article does say that the user was prompted to say, this device is already paired, and they ignored it and continued on, and therefore they received the feed. So there was a bit of something. There wasn't just a, hey, here's someone's video feed.
Yeah,
there was something.
I thought that was a bit of a cop-out answer, though. Like
it could be.
It's not the customer's fault.
No,
whether
it's not the customer's
fault.
But there was, at least there was some mechanism that said, hey, something is afoot. Something is not normal.
Yeah,
you might want to check that out.
Yeah, I suppose if I got a message that said it was already paired to an account, I would probably call tech support. But imagine how that tech support call would go. Right, because you're going to get some tier 1 help desk person who's reading in a manual, and this is an impossible situation, and that's likely what happened here. And you know, you end up getting the runaround, and before you know it,
how many times though have you said that's impossible, and they went, check this out?
Yeah,
and you go, that should be impossible. I remember hearing that. You remember Bill?
Oh yeah,
yeah. I heard him say those words. That's impossible. And then we turn around and show him. He goes, that should be impossible. We go, well, it's happening.
Should is one of my favorite words in IT. And I always tell people that you'd think computers were all ones and zeros. Things would either work or they wouldn't. But I blame Microsoft mostly for introducing this gray area in between the 1 and 0. Like they were a really advanced into quantum computing ahead of time. Like,
they were.
We're going to make things sort of work.
Maybe it works. Just depends on whether or not you're observing it.
All right, let's see. Now, I had a tough time this week with our crazy article, our WTF. I had two. One is not so much WTF. There was actually a big breaking article earlier this week that came out about a gentleman who said he could bypass the lock screen on iOS. And this is a big deal, that he could do it via the USB port, or not USB, the Lightning port, and that he could get around the counter for incorrect pin.
Right. You get so many tries before it says, this device is now like totally bricked or whatever.
Yep. And what he was saying was if I hook a keyboard up to that Lightning port, using adapters or whatever, that he could then present the key presses as fast as he wanted, and it wouldn't trip that counter for failed attempts, and he could try as many times as he wanted, and he could get in. And for me, when I saw that initial announcement, I thought, well, maybe this is the way those unlock boxes work, because there's a vendor out there that's selling a box that you plug into the Lightning port.
Gray key or whatever it is.
Yeah. Gray lock, gray key,
something like that.
It's Gray key.
Yeah.
And so I thought, hey, maybe this is how they work. Well, a couple of the news agencies that were reporting this couldn't recreate it. Apple goes and reviews it, and they said, actually, it's not working. What the guy is trying, most of the pin codes that he's sending to it aren't even being processed at all. So whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. And so it's not working. So it's a bit of a false start. And Cult of Mac had a good write-up of it on their website. Their original headline was, Hacker discovers bypassing iPhone passcode limit just requires a keyboard. Pretty significant, right?
Yeah.
But then they followed up on that to say, well, actually, it doesn't quite work that way. So it looks like the system is still secured, at least as according to Apple, and we'll see. But there is obviously some kind of vulnerability on the Lightning port, because otherwise Gray Key wouldn't be in business.
Right.
And so that's
they've just introduced that whole idea of making the Lightning port only for power after like an hour of non-use or something.
I think it was like 48 hours. There were two things. It was 48 hours after you had logged in, or
Right.
7 days after it had powered off, or something like that. There were these
Right.
two different times of window, but that's not really fixing the problem. That's kind of like OpenBSD turning off hyperthreading,
Yeah.
right?
It's still there.
Spectre and Meltdown are still there. You just can't use it, and that's how they're saying is, we're going to take our ball and go home. We're going to turn off the Lightning port. So there is still some kind of exploit. If somebody gets your phone in that window of time, it's still open. So Apple does still have to figure that out. And I'd be really surprised if they didn't figure that out soon, if they haven't already.
Yeah.
But with the case of the Gray Key, they were pretty affordable. I think it was like $15,000 to get the Gray Key box. So if they got blocked, they really wouldn't feel bad about it. Versus some of the vendors out there that have sold these exploits for over $1 million.
That's crazy.
And if all of a sudden that exploit's not valid anymore, all that value goes away. So who knows? All right, so that was one candidate, but the one that I settled on was this guy right here. Betting giant BetVictor leaked a list of its own internal systems password. This was on ZDNet, and this one was like just the most grievous violation of sysadmin policy. There's so many things wrong with the situation.
This right here is why you should start a bug bounty program.
So problem number one is that somebody inside of BetVictor kept a document of all of their systems and the associated passwords that go along with them. Basically, the keys of the kingdom. A list of passwords is one thing. A list of usernames is another thing. But a list of the usernames, the passwords, and the systems they go to, along with their IP addresses, like detailed data, like everything you need to know, that is just a recipe for disaster to all be stored in one place in a simple document. But what pushes this one over the edge is when you take that document and you add it to your knowledge base that's customer facing that anybody can search and find. Like
this is a stroke of brilliance right here.
It really.
They were like, I'm having a hard time remembering those usernames and passwords and what associated device they go to. I'll just put it in the knowledge base. That'll make it easy. I can just search it out.
Yeah, so ZDNet actually has a screenshot of this, which is pretty funny, where they went into the knowledge base of the BetVictor site, and they just typed in the word admin in the knowledge base search, and the first one that comes up is an article called Login/links to back offices -internal. Turns out, if you put -internal in the subject line, it doesn't actually protect the document. I wonder if they added like -encrypted to the end of some file.
Now it's encrypted.
So this one, I laugh. It's funny because I don't work for them. These other ones, this is a nightmare. But this one boils down to human error, right? So here was some kind of document that was maintained by the sysadmin team. I assume the sysadmin team. And then it was just placed in the wrong place. That place ended up being public. And here we've got a problem. And you see this with people like who accidentally leak their AWS keys via GitHub or other resources where we can accidentally turn something public that we didn't intend to be. Now, we don't know exactly how it got there yet, or at least it hasn't been disclosed to the public. This might not be the sysadmin's team's fault. So, we kind of joke about it and you immediately think about blaming them, but
it's the CISO. He did it.
It could be the CEO, right?
That's true.
So there's a lot of chief executives out there, right? CEOs who aren't IT people, right? They're business people. They're visionaries. They have ideas. And here they have a company that relies on a lot of tech systems that they don't understand. But they don't ever want to end up in one of those situations like, do you remember a few years ago, I think it was San Francisco, where they fired the guy who was running their fiber optic network? And so he, before leaving, changed the password on all of their fiber switches.
Nice.
And so he had control of the entire fiber network, and he wouldn't give it up. And they stuck him in jail for contempt of court.
Isn't that like illegal?
Oh, absolutely illegal.
He didn't give a game.
So they got him for contempt of court, stuck him in jail. He sat in there for a few weeks before finally giving up the password.
The
unlike the
principle
system.
of the thing, Don.
I know. So people get upset.
That's right.
So there are some executives out there who say, look, I know I don't understand these systems, but I need to have the usernames and passwords. I need to have access to these because if anything ever happens with the IT department, I need to be able to hire somebody else. I need to be able to bring in contractors. And I can understand that as an IT guy, as a person who's been on both sides of the fence, who's been on the management side and on the worker side. Like management needs to have access to that. but they don't understand those systems, and they could screw it up real bad well, you and I have been through this at a certain company we've worked for, but you know, I can understand that need. So then you have somebody who wants that kind of power, but then puts it in a document and sticks it somewhere. So I want to remember this, so I'll put it over here, and all of a sudden it ends up being customer facing. It's a bad thing. I feel bad for the sysadmin team if it's not their fault. If it is the sysadmin team's fault, then I feel bad that we're calling them sysadmins. But you know, these kind of mistakes can happen. I'm hoping that these were for internal systems. I'm hoping that their demarcation between their internal and external network was well secured. So even if you had these passwords, you couldn't use them.
Right. You'd have to be on the internal network to actually access these things, hopefully.
Yeah, and unfortunately...
But who doesn't love remote administration, Don?
Yeah, and if you make a mistake this big, the odds of having good security everywhere else is not high. So, so we'll see how that one pans out. But, you know, I feel bad for the team if it's not their fault.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so Bet Victor, probably not where you want to put your sports book in right now.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Try their competitors.
If you're a betting man, you should probably try a different site. You ever do online gambling?
I've never done online
Neither
gambling.
have I, but it's a billion-dollar business.
People love it.
So, yeah.
People love it.
All right, well,
Gamblers Anonymous.
Is it illegal in Florida?
I don't know.
So when I was
know
in
we have some gaming though because of the Native American reservations. They do it, and then there's some like boats as well.
When I lived in Seattle, I know it was in the state of Washington, it was illegal.
Right.
And if your employees did online gambling from a work computer, the company was held liable for it. So we had to be our own police for that to make sure that our users weren't able to get to gambling sites. So I mean, it was annoying because I never wanted to interfere with our employees' data. I want to trust our employees, but now when you've got like a liability around it, you have to. So to look that up. See, this is where it's hard to be an IT guy these days because you don't know what you've got to get in and govern anymore.
Yeah, you're crossing so many boundaries and lines, and things change and shift on a daily basis.
All right. Well, that was supposed to be a funny article, and I turned it all depressing and annoying. So, that's a good note to end it on.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Good luck out there, because we're screwed.
You're gonna need it. What was it? Smash TV. Good luck. You'll need it.
All right. Yeah. Now we can do like the Aliens 2 quote, right?
Yeah.
Game over, man. Yeah. All right.
5-year-old girl that could have done this. Let's put her in charge.
Maybe we got him demoralized. Well, the joys of IT. All right. Well, that is going to wrap up our news segment for the week. I think it was a pretty good podcast. I enjoyed it. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure, my man. Thanks for having me.
And for all of you out there in the IT world, stay safe. Secure your passwords. Don't post them in a public venue. Recommended security.
If you do, email it to me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. And as always, thank you to ITProTV for sponsoring Technado, the fun hour and a half where we get to sit around and talk about tech news, which is a blast. Always. And as always, if you are interested in learning about IT, be sure to check out ITProTV at itpro.tv. Our courseware library covers all sorts of topics like proper security practices. It's in there. IPsec, we cover that in a few places, and the majority of the things that solve life's problems all found in there. So definitely check it out at itpro.tv. Also, be sure, if you enjoyed the podcast, to like us, thumbs up, whatever it is on YouTube. Subscribe. Yeah, we're on iTunes and several other places there. Be sure to do that. Pass us on to your friends. We want people to learn about Technado. All right, Daniel, thanks again. And for you viewers out there, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.